Working? Yes. Okay. All right. So today is our second part for Pesach. Last week we covered the Seder, which is the part of Passover that everybody loves the most. It is the most widely observed Jewish holiday in the entire year. More people celebrate Passover than come for Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. And don't even talk about Sukkot and Shavuot. But the Seder being fun, oftentimes people forget that in order to prepare for Passover, there's work involved. That Passover doesn't just happen automatically. Right? When we get ready for Hanukkah, what are you going to get ready for? Right? You get some candles, you got a holder for them, boom, you're ready for Hanukkah. And when you're getting ready for Purim, you got to make sure that you send the gifts to the poor, send gifts to your friends. But that's you do it on the day, right? You just say, hi, here, have a candy bar and an orange. And I mean, it's simple. It's not a complicated thing. For Passover, because of the way the Torah gives us the commandments, it's not just about that one-night event. Passover is a week-long holiday, and it is a week-long holiday when we change the most basic part of our human life, the kitchen. As we talked about when we discussed kashrut, how we eat is one of the most intrinsic things that makes us a human being and changes cultures. And Passover changes one of the most important ingredients, at least up until the 21st century, of the human diet, which is our grains. And therefore, it's going to involve some upheaval. It's going to involve some changes. So what I like to do is talk about why we're doing it, talk about what needs to be done, and talk about what actually needs to be done and not what doesn't have to be done. Because some people can go crazy when it comes time for Passover cleaning and preparation. And I want to make sure we do what's needed, but not go crazy. So there's a nice middle area that's where you're doing what you need to do, but you're not making yourself sick. Sound like a plan?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, let's remind ourselves of why we're doing this. Last week, we focused on the idea of explaining to our children about the day and what God had done for us. This week, we're going to focus on the top. By the way, the commandment to eat special food during Passover is mentioned many times in the Torah. This is just one of them. So as it says, 7 days you will eat unleavened bread. And on the seventh day, there shall be a festival of the Lord, which is a good reminder that the last day of Passover, or last 2 days if you live outside the land of Israel, is also a holiday. We have services, we don't do work, the usual things that we do for the major festivals. Throughout the 7 days, unleavened bread shall be eaten. No leavened bread shall be found with you. No leaven shall be found in all your territory. It's those last two parts that make Passover extra special. Because the idea that we're going to eat matzah, like we talked about last week, well, that's great. It's a wonderful symbolism. It's the bread of affliction. It's what we ate when we left. It's something that was also used for other sacrifices. It has so much symbolism. It's really easy to just put a piece of matzah on the plate and have that for dinner, and we're good. You know, you can even buy those 5-pound boxes of matzah, and then, you know, at the supermarket, it's easy. It's great. But the not eating other stuff and the don't even have it in your territory, in your possession, in your domain, that's where it gets harder. And that's what is going to take up, I imagine, a large portion of our time. Okay, but we'll talk about other things too, but that's one thing I want to make sure we get very clear. Okay, so again, summary based off what we did last week. There are only a few mitzvot associated with the holiday in its essence. One is the sacrifice, Korban Pesach. We don't do that anymore, no temple. The Passover ritual meal, the Seder, we went over that last week. The eating of matzah and maror, which we do at the Seder, but we're going to focus on what counts as matzah tonight, because not everything that's flat is matzah. For example, like a tortilla is not matzah. It doesn't matter that it's not poofy, it's not matzah. Pita bread is not matzah. One of those rice crackers, not matzah. And we'll explain why. And then the removal of the chametz, of the leavening. And that's the thing that we want to make sure is not in our possession. The chametz, and that's the word I'm going to use most of all because leavening just gets tiring. The chametz is what we were going to be hunting for. Okay, so let's work out how this chametz and matzah thing works together. We are commanded to remove all chametz, like we mentioned in our first verse. We are commanded to eat matzah, as we also talked about. Matzah, therefore, must be made with ingredients that could also make chametz. We're going to look at another text that connects chametz and matzah, but this is the one that I want you to get just into your mind, which is, in order for something to be matzah, it has to become chametz. In order for something to be chametz, it has to be able to be matzah. What that means is, we see from Pesachim, from the Mishnah, these are the things with which one fulfills the obligation on Pesach: wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oats. Right, those are the 5 grains and the subspecies of grain, different types of barley and what. But these are the 5 types of grain that you can do the mitzvah of matzah. So for that Passover Seder, when you have that piece of matzah, you can make wheat matzah, barley matzah, spelt matzah, rye matzah, and oat matzah. Little controversy around oats, but don't worry. Most of the time when you go to the store, you're going to find wheat matzah. That is the standard matzah that is available. These are also the only types of grain that can make chametz. Right? So if you had, for example, ground up, I'm trying to think of a good example. If you have old lettuce, right, that's stuck to the bottom of your refrigerator, and it's under there, and it's all nasty and black and moldy and all of that, that's not chametz. That's dirt and nasty, and you should clean your kitchen, but it's not chametz. Right? If there's an old apple at the back of your cupboard, and it's just got worms in it or something, that's not chametz. If you have mud, that's not chametz. If you have dirt, is not chametz. Right. Or if we keep it in the Yiddish, schmutz is not chametz. Schmutz is the Yiddish word for like dirt and muck. Right? That's not chametz. Chametz has to come from one of these 5 things. Now, unfortunately, these 5 things are all over the place. They are in so many products and used in so many things, even if you don't always see it. So oftentimes you'll find things that say stabilizers in products. Many of those stabilizers that come from one of these types of grains. So we do have to be very careful when we're buying products that we get products that are labeled kosher for Passover, unless it's like an apple or a carrot, where it's not an issue. But if you're buying things that have been processed, we do want to make sure they're kosher for Passover, because these things do sneak in to a lot of products without people noticing. So that is important. But when it comes time for cleaning, these are your targets, right? Dirt is not your target. You could have the nastiest bathroom in the world, and you're still ready for Passover. I don't want to use your bathroom, but as far as the mitzvah of Passover goes, you're still okay. Assuming you're not out also eating, giant loaves of French bread in your bathroom. That's not a problem. So, whoop, does that mean we're having technical difficulty? No. Okay, we're fine. Was there someone else? Yeah. Okay, so those are your targets. Those 5 different types of grain and the various varieties of them are the target, and also the target for what we're going to eat. Which brings me back to what we have up at the top here. Chametz and matzah are both kinds of bread. We, in the modern world, we tend not to think of matzah as being bread. Matzah is matzah, and bread is the poofy stuff that comes in a bag that's in the grocery store. They are both types of bread. And throughout the ancient world, you would eat both, right? Some days you'd eat loaves, and other days you'd be working and you wouldn't have time to let the bread rise. You would just go ahead and throw something into a pan, and you'd cook it really quick, and you'd make matzah. Those are both types of bread. So people often ask, well, if I have flour, is flour okay for Passover? It gets a little complicated with modern flour that's often been processed in funny ways, but let's take the ancient world where you had flour, right? You took the wheat, you ground it up, and you've got the white powder. Is that kosher for Passover? Yes. Absolutely. Because if it wasn't kosher for Passover, what would you be eating? That's what you need to make matzah. So flour can be used to make matzah. It can also be used to make chametz. And it has to be the same flour that works for both. Wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oats. By the way, tip, don't get spelt matzah. It is nasty. It is literally cardboard. It's supposed to be like super healthy and everything. Don't recommend spelt matzah. I've had oat matzah. I've had barley matzah. I've never had rye matzah. But wheat. There's a reason we eat wheat as a global community, because wheat is nicer. It tastes better.
People have to eat the oat ones.
Unfortunately, yes. If people are gluten-free, or specifically people with celiac allergies and other issues, then yeah, oats, there are strains of oats that they can eat that they can still do the mitzvah. But for the rest of us, go for the wheat. It's fun to try the other ones, but don't make it part of your Seder.
Chocolate.
So, but not the regular oat. You cannot eat that on.
So regular oats, like you went to, you got the Quaker Oats, instant oatmeal and all of that. No. And we're going to talk about why those other things are trouble in just a minute. So during this time, we only eat matzah during the holiday, but that doesn't mean you have to eat matzah for every meal. Right? If you're going to eat bread while it's Passover, it has to be matzah. But if you're not going to eat bread, if you want potatoes, if you want fish, and you don't want bread with it, that's okay. You don't have to eat matzah, except at the Seder, right? Except at the Seder. At the Seder, there's the mitzvah to eat the matzah. For the other days and the other times of the days, eat whatever is not chametz. And that's fruit, vegetable, eggs, cheeses, all sorts of things, no problem. Good? Okay. So this whole connection really comes down to this issue of seor, which is, I'm trying to see where they put the area, seor, right? The leavening. In the Torah, it talks about the seor, the leavening, because that was the way people made their bread rise in the ancient world. Anybody here a baker? Right? Do you like?
Well, not by profession.
No, but you know how baking works, right?
Sure.
Anybody here make sourdough bread?
No,
Yeah,
not
sourdough is hard, right?
Yeah.
Because you have to make a piece, and then you have to use it, and then you use the piece from your next batch to start your next batch.
Yeah.
And you keep it.
It's like a culture.
It's exactly a culture.
Like yogurt.
Right. So until the modern world, everything was sourdough, because nobody had little yeast packets. Nobody had yeast they could add on their own, a little bit. You could take your bread and put it by the window, and the wild yeast would come and help make it ferment. Literally, there's wild yeast just floating in the air, and that would work. But most people wanted bread that had a little more fermentation, a little more rising to it. And so they would use a piece from the last batch, and people were making bread every day because you didn't have a refrigerator. You had to make your bread fresh. So they would keep a piece that they would use and keep rebuilding for a whole year. And that was called the seor. At Passover time, you would take that piece and it would be destroyed. We'll talk about that later. So this is what we're talking about for the leavening. It isn't yeast packets. Yeast by itself is not a problem. It's yeast mixed with flour, mixed with water that makes chametz, or this sourdough lump mixed with flour, mixed with water, makes chametz. So this is from the Mechilta, one of the earliest Midrash collections. And this is kind of just a little peek of looking at how the rabbis read the Torah carefully to understand the laws that we have. They said 7 days, or the leavening lump shall not be found in your houses. This tells me only that the transgression, the sin, against finding it. How do I know? Where do I derive? The same for seeing it, right? That it can't even be visible, not just like stumble across it. From further on in the same next chapter, and seor, the leavening, shall not be seen by you in all of your boundaries, right? So I'm adding the two different verses together to understand I can't find it and I can't even see it, right? It has to be completely gone. This tells me that only seor is subject to the injunctions against being seen and being found. How do I know? Whence do I derive? The same for chametz. So they're saying, well, wait a minute. The verses, if you read them very, very carefully, are only talking about this lump of stuff. How do I know that chametz, things made with the lump of stuff, are also off limits? Following the logic here? Right? So like I said, the Mechilta is one of the earliest layers of rabbinic study, because it's showing you how all the pieces fit together and the careful study about where it comes from in the Torah. Well, it is written, chametz shall not be seen by you, and seor shall not be seen by you. Both of them are in the same verse. Therefore, seor is compared. It's likened to chametz, and chametz to seor. They seem to be being used as though they were similar enough that we can rule that they are identical for the law. Just as the first, seor, is subject to both, so the second is subject. And just as the second, the chametz, is of the 5 species, the list we just had, so the first. So the ruling from one piece can help us understand the other. The ruling for this one can help us understand the first. Right, that's how the rabbis use the Torah to pull all the pieces together to get a bigger understanding of what it was God was asking us to do, and how they said, look, if the Torah was written by God, then God was very, very careful with his words. And if you take the words as being carefully used, then you can begin to understand what God was asking us to do. Make sense? Okay, this is a little complicated. Don't worry. Most of us are not bakers. It's not such a big issue. And you can just trust me and the other rabbis that have tried to present this more clearly. But if you're interested in how did the earliest rabbis prove what they were saying, this is just a glimpse of some of the work that they did. Okay, so we've got the flour and we've got the water. But like I said, flour plus water can make matzah. Flour plus water can make chametz. What is the difference? Time. Time. Leavening happens when the water and the flour are mixed and left for time, right? Those of you who have ever made anything know that you put the flour, you put the water in, you mix it up, you knead the dough, right? And then you put it in a bowl and you cover it and you wait. You're waiting so that it can ferment, it can expand. The question is, how much time? Too much time, and you have chametz. Not enough time, and it hasn't become dough. It's just a puddle. So how much time do you have? Well, in the old days, back when people had to bake every single day, leavening was originally something that people could tell just by looking at the dough. They literally could look at a lump of dough and say, that's been sitting there for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, 4 hours. Just by the way the dough had cracked and the lines on it and all, they were able to just tell, because that was how they lived. Sometimes, however, the dough didn't give any signs. Even back in the days of the Mishnah, they said, you know what, you can't always tell by looking at a piece of dough. Maybe the one next to it, you can tell. And if they came from the same batch, then you can follow, this one is risen, that one's risen. But if you can't tell at all, the sages gave a rule of thumb to help us avoid using dough that has leavened. And this comes from the Talmud, where they mentioned Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, this is the time it takes a person to walk from Migdal Nunaya to Tiberias, which is a meal, which is 2,000 cubits. That's meal, not mile. It's a different measure. 2,000 cubits, which works out by most people's estimate of how long it takes to walk that distance to be about 18 minutes. So when you take your flour and you take your water and you put them together, you have 18 minutes to get it in the oven. If you let it go longer than 18 minutes, it's chametz. Now, in modern factories that make matzah, all of this is automated. It still has to be done very, very carefully. They have to clean the machines between each run to make sure there's no leftover bits of dough, because those leftover bits are now rising. But it's much easier to be, control of. In the old world, not so much. In the old world, you had to have a good sense of the timing, and you made your own matzah. But because eating chametz is such a big problem, Nowadays, most people would rather buy the matzah that they can be sure of, rather than just buying, rather than making their own, even though it is technically possible. All right, how we doing? So far, so good. Okay, there is a side question. Now, this is not such a big issue for people that are becoming Jewish, because when you become Jewish, you are sort of gaining new traditions, and you don't have any baggage from the old country. But for people who come from Europe, there is a question about what we call kitniot, or also in English, sometimes it gets translated as legumes. But we're going to call it kitniot because it's not exactly legumes perfectly scientifically. So back in the day in Europe, people didn't only eat flour that was from the grains. They'd also eat flour made from lots of things. They had potato flour, they had bean flour, they made lots of different types of flours. I mean, not flours like smelling flour, but flour that you would make dough from to cook with. And there was a problem, which is before the modern wheat got all beautiful and white, you know, because nowadays we only have the kernel piece, we get rid of all the husk, and so the wheat is always perfectly white like snow. That's new. In the old days, the wheat was dirty brown, right? Because you would crunch it up with all the good parts on the outside too, the healthier fiber parts. And what we would call whole wheat flour nowadays, that was the only kind of flour that people had. And if you have a big sack of whole wheat flour, and you have a big sack of bean flour, they look kind of similar. Remember, like our discussion of meat and chicken and all of that, of modern chicken and old chicken, very different look. Same thing for these grains. So they were worried because you needed your flour to make your matzah, but you also needed your bean flour to make other stuff. But your bean flour, you could mix with water and let it sit for 4 hours. That's no problem. But your wheat matzah, or sorry, your wheat flour, if you let it sit for more than 18 minutes, now you've broken the commandment of Passover. So for those communities, the rabbi said, look, during the week of Passover, just don't use beans. Just, nope, no beans at all. That way we'll make sure there are no mistakes. And that was an enactment, a rule that was accepted by the communities of Europe. Now, once a rule has been accepted by a community, it tends to live on. Even if the circumstances change, even if there's no longer the same problem. So to this day, many Ashkenazic Jews, they're not going to touch a bean salad during Passover. Even though they never cook with bean flour, they still observe no kitniot at all. And this was extended in later years to also cover things like rice and corn. So all of those types of grains, well, technically not exactly the same types of grains. It's complicated, right? All of those other types of foods are off limits for people from those particular communities. The Sephardim, they never had that problem. And so for the Sephardim, they don't have a restriction. Again, remember, processed foods are always trouble during Passover anyway, because they mix in lots of other stuff. That's why, like, cornbread, for example, is not made mostly from corn. Cornbread is made mostly from regular flour with corn mixed in. So you don't just say, hey, cornbread, no problem. It's that you have to still be careful in many other ways. But corn on the cob, string beans, you know, those kinds of things, the Sephardim have no problem with. And truth be told, many of the modern people as well. For example, in the conservative movement, there have been many very good research papers that have been written on this. And I personally do not follow the kitniot. So I am happy to eat corn, string beans, that kind of thing, rice during Passover.
Yeah, we were told to, because it's part of our culture, and we know by doing research and, well, getting your DNA,
Right.
you pretty much know where you come from.
Right.
And the reason why you eat beans and rice, it's your staple. Those are your staple foods.
Correct.
So if you took away your staple foods, then you're pretty much not even existing in your culture for that period of time.
Right. And if it was necessary, so for example, bread in the fluffy form is part of American staple culture, it's still necessary for us to say no during that week of Passover, just for the week, just 7 days. But if it's not necessary, then there's no reason to add an additional limitation. Passover, trust me, is hard enough as it is. Now, like I said, the one tricky part of this is that if you eat the kitniot, if you eat these kinds of foods during Passover, good luck finding things in America that are labeled kosher for Passover that were made with them. If you're in Israel, it's much easier because, of course, the Sephardim in Israel, they eat these things. And therefore, the supermarkets are full of things that are made with kitniot during Passover for them. But in America, almost all of the agencies that supervise for keeping things kosher are Ashkenazic. And none of them are supervising kitniot. So fresh beans, fresh corn, no problem. Processed things, you're not going to find it in this country. So it's kind of hypothetical, except for your produce department. Good? Okay. So now let's get down to the cleaning, right? Roll up our sleeves. They're already up. As we said, you can't have it, you can't find it, it can't be around. So that means I got to make sure it's gone. I can't just not eat it. I have to remove it. And that action is what leads to the extra effort that comes with Passover. Again, taking from the Mishnah, on the evening of the 14th of Nisan, that is the first night the day before the first night of Passover, they search the house for chametz by the light of a lamp. And we're going to talk about that in more detail. But just a reminder that by the day before, that was when you would be done with preparing the house for Passover. And then the next day, you would do the sacrifice back 2,000 years ago. And then the following night is when you would have the Seder. So this is the night before your Seder. You're checking your house to make sure that all the chametz is gone. And every place into which chametz is not brought does not require searching. Very important rule. So for example, if you never take food into your attic, you do not need to check your attic. If you never take food into your bathroom, you do not need to check your bathroom. If you never take food into your laundry room, you don't have to check your laundry room. It depends on everybody's house and situation. Some people take food everywhere, or some people have children who take food everywhere. In which case, yeah, we have to check. And we're going to talk about what you're looking for in just a second. But for many people who are in control of the food in their house, you're able to work out. I never have gone into that room eating for the last year. I don't actually need to go in there and check every corner to make sure there's no chametz. It is not, it's not possible. One of the other rules that is explained very clearly in the Mishnah regarding the dough in the cracks of a trough. So the trough was like the wooden board that people would use for making their dough, like not a cutting board, but more like a wooden bowl, but not like steep, but sort of a shallow wooden board. And you would roll your dough in that. Well, wood breaks, wood gets cracks, and when you're rolling dough on it, the dough is going to get stuck in some of those cracks. Everyone got the picture? Okay. If there be as much as an olive's bulk, that means to say a lump like that, then you have to remove it. You got to dig it out with a big crack, though. That's a big crack. It's a big crack. And if not, it is annulled, meaning we don't concern ourselves with it. So if you have a tiny little crumb wedged inside your crack, if it doesn't come out, it doesn't come out. You don't need to stress over it. Because anything beneath that measure was considered to be insignificant, right? Legally nullified. Which is going to bring us to 6 general rules that will help you plan your cleaning for Passover. So, number 1. All property and possessions, everything you own, must be cleaned and checked to make sure it's free of chametz, except for the following things. Right? So in general, yes, we have to check everything, but we also can limit the everything into less than everything. If during the year chametz is not brought into a place, like we talked about, your attic, the bathroom, whatever, it does not have to be cleaned or checked for chametz. If, any article which is not used on Pesach. So, for example, let's imagine you have a big pot that you often use during the year for making things. Or I'll give you a better example from my own house. You have a bread machine. Right? I'm not going to be using my bread machine during Passover. So what do I do with my bread machine? Do I have to clean it? No. I just have to, how do they phrase it again? Does not need to be checked, provided it is put away and the chametz is sold. We're going to come back to the selling of chametz in a later page. But basically, you can take it, you close it up, you stick it in the closet, you put tape over the closet, you put it in the garage, wherever it's out of the way and no one's going to use it by accident. And it's no longer in your kitchen kind of thing. And that is done. If you also sell the chametz. Now remember, selling the chametz we're talking about here is the chametz that is stuck inside the metal or the plastic of the container. And we'll come back to it. This is something that everybody always goes, what? We'll come back to it. Let's do cleaning first. Part 4. Crumbs, which have been rendered completely inedible to the extent that they are not fit to be eaten by a dog. That's actually a quote from the Talmud, are not considered chametz. So let's imagine, remember my discussion of the refrigerator, and under the refrigerator there's some weird, nasty, blackened, horrible things, right? And even the dog won't eat them. Even if those used to be bread, they do not count as chametz now, because they're no longer food. And if it's not food, it's not chametz. It's dirty and you should clean your kitchen. But dirt is not chametz. Dirt is not chametz. And that's important because a lot of people try to make their Passover cleaning like trying to clean the entire house. And if you want to clean your whole house, that's great. I mean, I remember when I lived in Japan. In Japan, people would clean the whole house for New Year's in January. Right? They would tear out everything and they would be shaking every blanket and everything, futon out the windows, and it was huge. But they didn't have a big holiday called Pesach the following week. And so they could use those winter months to do all the cleaning, and it was fine. And if you want to use your winter months to do a whole bunch of cleaning for your house and repaint the roof or whatever, fine, go for that. But don't try and do it the week before Passover. There's so many other things we need to do before Passover that retiling your bathroom to make it clean is not what you want to do during this time. Dirt is not chametz. You just need to worry about chametz. So if it can't be eaten, it's no longer chametz. 5, the general obligation to check for and destroy crumbs does not apply if the crumbs are less than the size of an olive, like we talked about on the previous page, and are dirty or spoiled enough to prevent a person from eating them, right? No one's going to want to eat them, and it's too small to matter about. So that's fine. And one of the best ways to make sure that happens, a household cleaner. You get your bleach mix, you get your Pine Sol or whatever's your favorite cleaner, and that's what you use when you wipe and you soak and when you mop the floor. And anything that gets touched with it, I guarantee no one here is going to want to eat it. Right? So even if you don't quite get everything off the floor, not every little crack between the linoleum and the tiles and the floor, that's not a problem. As long as you've wiped it down and you know that it's no longer food, you're good. Okay. Because we want to clean responsibly. And by clean responsibly, I mean there are limits. You might be tempted to insist on doing the extra work anyway. Right? And this is something that is very natural. It's almost spiritual to make yourself just totally exhausted by cleaning your house as though you were cleaning a temple for God kind of thing. To be machmir, this is the Hebrew word meaning stringent, super strict, right? You might think that, okay, maybe I don't have to clean every crack in the floor of my kitchen, but maybe God would like me to. Even if God is being gentle, maybe God would be happier if I did it. And it's really easy to always think God wants me to be stricter. God wants me to be stricter. God wants me to be stricter. However, in these stringencies, being super strict lies grave danger of causing many laxities, of being relaxed about and brushing aside the actual mitzvahs during the Seder. Right? Sometimes when you are being over strict on one thing, it means you're not being strict enough somewhere else. So for example, we are commanded to rejoice at Passover. We are commanded to have excitement and enthusiasm at the Seder, and to sing and celebrate and tell the stories again, everything we talked about last week. If you've been working for 3 weeks, for 4 weeks, and you've been cleaning every single surface in your house, when the Seder finally comes, all you want to do is go to sleep. You don't want to do anymore. You're done. And you lose the joy of the holiday. And that's not right. Right? It's a mitzvah to enjoy the holiday, just as much as it's a mitzvah to get rid of chametz. And therefore, we do getting rid of chametz correctly, and we do enjoyment correctly. And we don't kill the enjoyment for extra cleaning that isn't required. Make sense? Okay. So many like to do more cleaning than the bare minimum, to such an extent that some even incorporate their general spring cleaning, as we call it in America, into the required pre-Pesach chores. These extra exertions should not prevent them from fulfilling their obligations on Pesach, and particularly on the Seder night. So if you like once a year to take all of your sheets and do all of your laundry and get them all fresh and hang them outside. Once a year, you're going to do everybody, even the sheets you never use, right? The ones you just keep at the back of the closet in case you have guests. But once a year, you like to wash everything. Do it after Passover. I do that the week after Passover, not the week before. If every year you like to do maintenance on your air conditioning unit, because it's really, really important, this isn't the time you do that, right? You do that later. Make sure that you don't confuse spring cleaning or super cleaning with Passover cleaning. Passover cleaning, targeting on chametz and only chametz. Good? Trust me, there's enough work. All right, so I'm just going to give you a few general things. I'm looking at the time, and when we get closer, I have more material that you can ask for, and I can send you about guidelines for cleaning, but just some general rules, application of how this works. Floors, right? Nowadays, our floors are not made out of dirt. We have carpet, we have concrete, we have wood. It's nice. It's really, really good. And that means our floors don't have big cracks that are in them, big holes, which means if I drop a piece of bread, it's not going to disappear down a hole and then I'll find it during Passover. If I drop a piece of bread, it's going to hit the tile and then I'm going to bend over and pick it up, right? Or when I go to sweep, or wash it with a mop, I'll find it. And if I don't find it, the mop is going to absolutely, spread all the chemicals across it, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. So we don't have to be down there with a toothpick checking the cracks of our floors. Good. Food cabinets, where you keep all your cans and jars and everything. If you're going to use the cabinet on Passover, then you have to take everything out, give it a wipe over to make sure that it's all clean and been rubbed, and then just make sure that it's all gotten covered. And then put the stuff back in it. If you're not going to use the cabinet during Passover, piece of tape, you're done. You come over to my house during Passover, 80% of our cupboards are just taped over, right? Because, they have all the plates and other things that we're not going to be using. So we just tape over it so there's no accidents, no mistakes, and we're done. And we sell the chametz. We'll get back to that. Refrigerator, take the food out, clean it over, put whatever food that's good for Passover back into it. So far, it's not so bad, right? Sinks, clean the sink, pour boiling water into it. Most people also put like one of those Rubbermaid little tubs into the sink, and you're good for Passover. We have our sink tubs that we keep in the garage just for Passover. We bring them out when it's Passover, we use them, we put them away, we save them for next year. They're lasting forever because we only use them once a year. one week a year, that is. Countertops. If you use them for hot chametz, right? So for example, let's you cooked pizza at home during the year, you take the pizza and you put it on the countertop itself, not on a pan on the countertop. You're putting your hot food on the countertop. Then you have to clean it down well, and then you have to pour boiling water over it. This sounds familiar. It's what we talked about during the kosher classes earlier on. And then usually we cover them as well to make sure that things can't possibly come into contact. Now, if you never use your counters for hot food, it's the counter by the phone. right? That's where you know, people still have phones with little notepads next to them.
No,
We all use cell phones now. It's the counter where you put your keys in the mail. How's that, right? It's, you're never putting food there, and certainly not putting hot food there. Then just clean it, and you're done. There's nothing else that needs to be done. Tabletops, again, wash them down with a household cleaner. Some people put tablecloths over them, but just a good wash is fine. Stovetop, you know, where you actually have the fire, or in Florida, mostly electricity for the electric stoves. Wash the whole thing, wash all the surfaces, anything that could come into contact. If you have those grates, you know, the metal things with the fire, those have to be cleaned down, and then light up the fire and just let it burn. 5 to 10 minutes at its maximum heat, and you're good. Electric, same thing. You don't have grates usually. You just turn on all the burners, let it go for a while. If you have those beautiful glass-covered ones, even easier, because you just give it a good clean, turn them on, and you're all set. Okay? Oven, wash out anything that's edible inside there, which hopefully your ovens don't look horrible and have bits of bread sticking to the walls, but just in case, make sure you get rid of it. Wash it over with the cleaner, and then heat the inside of the oven at the highest temperature for an hour. If you have a self-cleaning cycle on your oven, it's even easier. You just clean it out, put it on, walk away, and it'll turn itself off when it's done. Pots, pans, dishes, cutlery, whatever is not going to be used for Passover. So you've got a whole bunch of pans, you got a bunch of knives and forks, things that you're not going to use during Passover. All you have to do is lock them up, seal them away, in some way make sure you won't accidentally use them during Passover. And then you can kosher the ones you are going to use according to the rules that we talked about during the kosher class. The exact same process. And if you ever have particular questions of, Rabbi, what do I do with this fork? You just give me a call or an email or whatever, and I'll help you through it. Good? Okay. Dish towels, just wash your dish towels. That's perfectly fine. Same thing with tablecloths. Just wash them up.
Dog food.
Dog food. Dog food is fine for Pesach as long as it's not something that you're going to eat.
Okay.
Right? So in general, it's fine. Now, don't go out and buy loaves of bread for your dog.
Of course not.
Right. But processed dog food is not a problem. Do you have dogs? 2 of them. Okay. All right. So let's get back to the question that everyone always wants to know. What do you mean sell the chametz, right? Mechirat chametz. So in the ancient world, it's always best to start there because then we can see the chain of thinking. In the ancient world, people had a couple pots, a couple knives, right? They didn't have a kitchen full of utensils. They didn't have cupboards full of plates and dishes. You just had a few little things, and most of your dishes were wood or maybe pottery that you could just go down to the river and get some more clay and make another plate for yourself. And that meant that getting ready for Passover was super easy. You just rekoshered your pots and your little knives, and you were done. And you scrubbed the wood and all of that kind of stuff. And if there were pots, you just threw the pots away and you'd make new pots for Passover. Nowadays, our kitchen is a little bit more complicated. Right? Everyone owns pots, plates, and other items that are either too numerous to be koshered or cannot be koshered. So what are you going to do? You're going to throw everything out every year, right? You're going to take all of your plates that are made out of porcelain that can't be made kosher and throw them away every year? There were some people who tried doing that for a while. And the rabbi said, no, you're being stupid, right? Because there's a mitzvah called bal tashchit, a mitzvah of not wasting. It's why we don't go around breaking plates just for fun. Even though you might think it's fun, you know, the whole Greek wedding smashing plates thing. We don't do that. We are very careful with things to make sure they don't get destroyed needlessly. And this is needless because we are allowed to sell chametz to somebody that isn't Jewish. And as long as we're not going to use it, and as long as it is owned by them, then the chametz is no longer ours, and we have fulfilled the mitzvah. And the alternative is to get rid of your bread machine, your toaster oven, probably your blenders and your mixers and other things, and every dish and plate that can't be kosher, and then all of your knives and forks, even the ones you don't want to use for a week, because it's only a week, you still have to kosher all of them and go through all of that process of putting them in the boiling water and all that stuff, which is, we are blessed with so much stuff nowadays that would make it a nightmare. So instead, you find what you're going to use, or many families will have a plastic tub, like my family does, full of our Passover dishes and our Passover forks and our Passover knives. And then we always have a few extra pots that we use all year that we will kosher, that will make kosher for Passover too. And everything else gets put away, sealed away, and sold. It's important to know, however, when you are selling, you are not selling the blender. You are selling the chametz in the blender. Right? Remember, we talked about during the kosher discussion that the surfaces of a pot or a blender or whatever, the pieces get stuck inside, like on a molecule level, right, down in the atoms. The pieces of chametz for this get stuck inside the metal, inside the porcelain. And that's what comes out when it gets warm. When I sell chametz, I'm selling the pieces inside. I'm not selling the pot. And therefore, the person has owned the chametz that's stuck in my material of stuff. And I'm just keeping it in my cupboard for safekeeping on their behalf. Because sales have to be done in a particular way under Jewish law, it is usually best to let this be done by a competent authority. Hello. So we send out a form. We usually also have an online system where people can just click to authorize me to sell the chametz on their behalf. And then I act as your agent. And I sell it. And then at the end of Passover, the sale reverts and it all goes back to you and you're good to go.
Have a list of people that you sell this to?
No, I have one person who buys on behalf of the entire congregation. So I give him a list of all the people who have sold their chametz. So he has a whole list of the name, the address, and ish, yeah, of what has been sold, and that way, it's a sale. It's there's an invoice. This was first begun way back before everybody had the giant storehouse of material. This was begun back when people would be, for example, liquor sellers. And a lot of liquor has wheat and other products mixed in it that is chametz. And if you had to throw away your entire stock every single year, well, first of all, you could never age your liquor. And second of all, you would go broke. And so they came up with the system of selling the chametz. As we've now moved into the modern world where for the rest of us, we would also go bankrupt if we had to rebuy everything every single year. This system allows us to make sure that what we are actually using has no chametz in it, and what still has chametz in it is no longer considered mine and is not going to be used. So that way we can fulfill the commandment without having to bankrupt ourselves over and over again.
When did this come about? When did they start actually selling these things?
Well, like I said, the actual selling as an idea came about 1,000 years ago for people who were doing it on behalf of their family business. When it became more common for an individual has been over the last couple hundred years as people began to own more stuff and need a way to still celebrate Passover, but also not throw 80% of their kitchen utensils away each year.
So it's because we're modern now.
Yep. This is a way of us being able to still keep the commandment while also being in the modern world. And that's not a problem, right? The commandments are meant for all time. And they're not something that we should only be able to do if we live like we were in the 1500s. We should be able to still keep the commandments even in 2118. But it does mean we have to use other parts of Jewish law to help us keep the commandments that maybe weren't necessary. And so in some ways, it's harder for us because we have to do this. In other ways, it's easier for us because we've got a lot more stuff and our life is more comfortable. So it's every generation has the difficulties they have to face around Passover. This is our difficulty, is the difficulty of abundance, the difficulty of having too much stuff, which doesn't mean you should run out and buy more stuff, but it does mean that we have to find a way to still live with it and not be overcome.
Or not buy as much.
Absolutely. But some things, you're just going to want. Most people are going to want a toaster at some point. And having to buy a new toaster every year gets tiresome. Most people are going to want plates that aren't all glass or aren't all metal. Most of our plates. What's that?
Some people can't even afford it.
And some people can't afford it, which we're going to get to as well. All right. So looking at the time, I got to run ahead now. So Bedikat Chametz. Remember we said on the 14th of Nisan, the night before the Seder, right? We do a search. We still do the search. Right? Even though you probably will be working on your house for a couple days before Passover, the night before is very special. Right? There is a blessing that we do, the standard mitzvah blessing, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al biur hametz, which the beginning is, of course, the standard, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us holy through his commandments and commanded us concerning the nullification of chametz, the getting rid of chametz. So we say that, we search our house, we make sure there's nothing, and then if we find anything, we set it aside. Now, that means that we walk around with a candle, which is actually really cool and an amazing experience to do. But if your house is one that has a lot of extra things that need searching, flashlight is perfectly fine. Personally, I like a candle, and if you've done your job during the day, a candle is perfectly fine during the night. If you haven't really searched your house yet for chametz and you're only doing it now, first of all, you're really late, and second of all, use a better light than just a candle. Because we should have already cleaned everything, you may hide a few pieces of chametz, carefully wrapped. Right? You don't just go around dropping bits of bread. But what we usually do in my family is we take some zip. Oh,
I think someone pulled up for something.
Okay, that's rather late. So we'll take little Ziploc bags. We'll put bits of bread in them, and then we will hide them. Actually, that's sort of one of Penelope's jobs. She hides them, and the kids and I try to find them. And one reason we do that is because we've said a blessing. So if you say a blessing and you found nothing, then it'd be like the blessing was wasted. So this way, we're sure that we are definitely going to find something. There is also a custom you'll see for many people of using a feather and a wooden spoon during that search. There are no good explanations of the spoon. The feather is kind of like a duster. The spoon is just a custom. There's some talk about maybe it was used as fuel for the fire. We're going to talk about that on the next slide, but there's no good explanation for why. Okay, so let's talk about what we say after that search. We say the first of our bitul chametz. This is our nullification of the chametz. Now, this happens to be in Aramaic rather than Hebrew, and that should tell you something. Anything you see that's written in Aramaic first is something that was meant to be understood by everybody, even the people who weren't very knowledgeable, right? Not just for the scholars, because Aramaic was more common than Hebrew was for many centuries in the Jewish world. So Aramaic was the like English of the day in America. Means it was known by more people, and then if you studied, you learned Hebrew too. They're very similar languages. That's why they're written with the same letters, but it's not the same language. But what it's saying is, and what you should say in either English or Spanish or any language you know best, because I'm guessing you don't know Aramaic so well, this is actually a legal declaration. You are like in court making a statement. All chametz or leaven in my possession that I have not seen and have not destroyed and do not know of shall be nullified and become ownerless, like the dust of the earth. You're basically saying, if I've missed something through all of my cleaning, garage cabinet that I forgot about, I no longer own that loaf of bread. Right? If someone were to come in and take that loaf of bread, it would not be stealing. It would be the same as picking up a rock in the desert. Nobody owns it, so it's not mine.
So what do you do after Passover? You can eat it as if it's yours now?
So you mean if you discover it after Passover, right? Because assuming that you have to be saying this in good faith, right? So
But say you come across it after you've done this, you come across
Right.
it, it's still Passover.
Oh, if it's still Passover. Oh, if it's still Passover.
This is just in case.
If it's still Passover, you have to get rid of it, right? If you discover it after Passover, then it's like finding a rock in the desert, right? It doesn't belong to anyone, and it didn't belong to you between when you said this and when you found it. As long as you find it after Passover, then it can become yours again. But this has to be said in good faith, right? You don't just put it in the back of the freezer and forget about it.
Found it.
Yeah.
No, just like what it says.
Yeah.
I didn't see it.
Didn't know it.
Come across it, you can discard it.
Yeah, during Passover, yes.
Yes,
During Passover, you should definitely get rid of it if you find it. If you find it after Passover, then it's just like any other ownerless object. It can become yours if you find it. Or maybe you'll never find it because that's why you didn't find it when you were searching.
Right.
The next morning, we do biur chametz. This is the destruction of the chametz that we found. So you light a little fire and you burn it up. Now, if you don't have a fireplace or you don't have a grill or a little barbecue thing that you can burn things on, you can destroy it in other ways too. Some people will drop it down the toilet. Some people will throw it in the trash and make sure the trash is out. Right? If it's on the right trash day, it works okay. So there's other ways to get rid of it. But the most classic way to get rid of it is to burn it, to do biur chametz. And then again, we say a declaration, which we add just a little bit more emphasis to. All leaven and anything leavened in my possession, whether I have seen it or not, whether I observed it or not, whether I have removed it or not, shall be considered nullified and ownerless as the dust of the earth. So without hesitation, no reservation, anything that's still chametz in this house no longer belongs to me.
And it doesn't apply to your car.
Well, your car is made out of bread?
No, there are some people that say you have to clean out your car as well.
Well, you do have to clean your car if you eat in your car, right? If you're somebody who.
So your car is part of your home as well.
Well, it's one of your possessions, yes, right. So if you have a car, or if you have a boat, or if you have a condo or a beach house or other things, and you're going to use them during Passover, then they have to be checked and all the chametz removed from. If you're not going to use them, the same way that you can seal up your cabinets, you can say the stuff in the condo is sold as my chametz and it is nullified by this statement. So if it's your property, you have to make sure that it is chametz free or sold.
One quick question. When you said that you do like you hide away, what do you do? Like, so let's say you want to do that game, sort of,
Right.
And when you find it, you keep it. That's what you burn the next
Yes,
day.
exactly right. Exactly right.
So
We gather it up. You get a little paper bag or something. You put it inside, and then that goes right on the fire.
Okay, so you hold it for next day.
Yep. Ma'ot chitim. Right before Passover, it is also considered a requirement to make sure that you donate. In the old world, you would donate actual flour. You would donate real grain in order that the poor would have something. Because we know that if you're too poor to afford matzah, you're not going to be able to do the mitzvah. And so we should always be supporting them anytime. But right before Passover, it's even especially emphasized to take care of the poor, to make sure they can also have a holiday. In the old world as well, we used to have like, what's the term? Tamhui. It was like a communal food bank. That's the word I'm looking for. They had like a pre-Passover food bank where there would be extra wine and extra wheat for people to be able to celebrate Passover, so that even the poorest person could still feel free on Passover and drink 4 cups of wine and have their matzah and have the holiday to do in their home.
It's
Exactly.
not a requirement to do it with the synagogue.
No. Actually, doing it in a synagogue is a very new thing, because the ancient way to do it for the sacrifice was always in your home or with a group of homes together, with many families together, a community, exactly, but not like all 5,000 people, but groups of people. And that was partly because of the sheep, right? When you do a sacrifice of a lamb, I don't know if you've ever seen a lamb, But you're talking 30 pounds of meat there or more. That's more than most 5-member families can eat in one night, because there's no leftovers for the Passover sacrifice. Anything that's left over is gone. So you want to make sure that you eat, and you want to eat all of it, and that means you need a group of people to share the Passover sacrifice. But doing that at the synagogue is nice now, especially on second night. If you don't have another place to go, we have a second night Seder coming up at Temple Israel this year. So thank you for the commercial opportunity. Okay, other preparations, and then we're done. Other things to think about before getting ready for Passover that are not cleaning and chametz related, because there should be other things on your mind. One, invite guests to your Seder, right? Having people that aren't just part of your family at the Seder is one of the things that makes the Seder so special. I've done one Seder in my life that was just me and one other person, and I won't do that again. Right? Because you need more people. You need that questions, those answers, and that comes to number 2. Review the Haggadah before the Seder. Read through it. Read through commentaries and discussions of the Haggadah so that you get new questions and you can have some new answers, new things to share, new ideas. Every year it should be a new experience. But that works best if you read a little bit beforehand rather than just opening it up for the first time on the Seder night. Review the story of Exodus. Open up the book, of Exodus in the Torah and start reading and reread what happened and what God did and what it means and all of that implications, so that when you experience it on the Seder, it feels like your story. Review Shir HaShirim. That's the Song of Songs. This is read during Passover traditionally as well, because it's considered to be a love song between us and God. And Passover should be about that feeling of love and of joy of being in God's care. Also, you should examine your life for spiritual chametz. Many of the Hasidic teachers in the early generation said that chametz in the self is when you puff yourself up, right? Your arrogance, your pride, your snobbery. Those should also be gotten rid of during Passover time. Right? Remember, you were a slave. Remember, you started with a disgrace. The beginning should come from disgrace, and we should end with joy. Bring yourself down so that God can bring you up. And then examine your lives and see which ways are you still enslaved to Egypt. Right? How are we still chained to the ideas of Egypt? Do we still idolize power? Do we still ignore the suffering of others? Are we still willing to turn a blind eye to the world around us? How are we still living in Egypt? Are we truly free yet? Or are there other things we have to let go of? Passover should be more than cleaning. It should be more than just reading the Haggadah. It should feel spiritually liberating. And it should be the beginning of a new holiday cycle that will lead us all the way through till Purim, which is just coming up now around the corner. Questions? Okay. Then we are done for tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
Always my pleasure.